Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. I see that people are just joining into the room. I'll give you a moment to get in here. And while we're waiting to get started on introductions, I would like to invite you to introduce yourselves. And please utilize the chat function to let us know where you're joining in from today. Let us know both the city and the country that you're dialing in from. If you're just joining us, thank you for joining the webinar today. My name is Lindsay Hilcoat, and I'm with Seed Global Education, and we're excited to be with you and our host from Chicago today, the University of Illinois Chicago College of Business. And while we're waiting to get started, I'd love to have you introduce yourselves. I already see Dhruvi's joining us from Goa, India. We've got Hadia from Islamabad, Pakistan. Someone here from Karachi, Jaipur. Fantastic. Great. So keep your introductions coming as you're joining us in. You can look in the chat there. Got Mumbai, Delhi. Afghanistan is a new country. Poland is a new country. Welcome, everyone. Mars, quite far from us today. All right, so keep that coming. I still see some people joining us, and we'll get started shortly. So if this is your first webinar with Seed Global Education, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about ourselves. Again, my name is Lindsay Hilcoat. I'm the Executive Director of University Partnerships from Seed Global Education, where we facilitate interactions with top universities like our host today and students like yourselves. And in addition to our master classes, we also host in-person events to connect highly qualified candidates with top schools, and these candidates are from India, Middle East, Africa, and Southeast Asia. So if you have the chance to meet us in person, please join one of our events. We also have a strong scholarships program of over $6.5 million of awards available as you're looking to fund your study abroad objectives in business abroad. So once again, we're excited to be welcoming the University of Illinois Chicago College of Business, or UIC Business, which is a top-ranked research-driven business school with a global reputation of excellence. You'll hear a little bit more about their impressive suite of graduate business programs a little bit later in the session, but we will be moving forward with our masterclass topic, which is very exciting and relevant today, which is analytics and AI for supply chain excellence and sustainability. So in this masterclass, we're going to be learning about physical infrastructure, financial markets, and digital technologies and how they work together to build operational resilience as we're trying to execute on very complex supply chains globally. And with that, I'm going to be introducing our speakers as well. And then we'll launch into a bit of a poll to see what you would like to learn most about today as we get started. Okay. So for our first speaker today will be Dr. Selva Nadarajah, and he is the Associate Professor and a scholar at the College of Business at the University of Illinois Chicago. And he is our expert that will be speaking about supply chain operations, and his applications work with energy systems, which we know are really important, especially with AI infrastructure and all of the power that is required to energize our entire networks nowadays and the growing AI infrastructure. So very interesting work, and we'll learn a little bit more about that. And after that, we'll be hearing from Dr. Jeff Jewett, who is the Assistant Dean for Business Recruitment, who will be going over the programs a little bit more in detail. So with that, I'm going to launch a poll before I turn it over to Dr. Nadarajah. And if you see on your screen here, let's understand which skill you think will be most important for future supply chain leaders. We'll hear what Dr. Nadarajah has to say about this, but first, your opinion. Maybe all of these skills are important, but do you think it's data analytics and visualization, AI and automation literacy, strategic decision-making under uncertainty, or cross-functional collaboration? They all sound important to me, but what do you think is most important? I see one taking a lead here. I'm going to give you 5 more seconds to answer, and then we'll show you the results. We've got a bit of a tie happening here. Let's see, 3, 2, 1. I'll share our results here. The majority of you think that AI and automation literacy is the most important skill, followed by data analytics and visualization. What do you think, Dr. Nadarajah? I'll pass it over to you to share your screen and let us know your thoughts about what is most important to develop.
Yeah, thanks, Lindsay. That's a wonderful segue to kick off my talk. While I share my screen, so I actually got done teaching a class on AI agents and process automation in a supply chain program. So I'll weave in some comments about AI automation as we go in. Can you see my screen? Good. All right. Right. Good morning or good evening, everyone, depending on where you're from. It's a beautiful day in Chicago here, and so it's nice to start off by talking to you from all over the world. So I'm fairly confident that within the last day or two, you've ordered something online. So, for instance, in the morning, my wife and I were getting our kids ready. We realized we forgot milk, so we had to quickly do that on Uber Eats. I was in India just a couple of months ago, and I know the digital economy there and the last mile ecosystem has just boomed. And so that's certainly, part of supply chains and operations that affect us personally, right? And then on the other hand, you probably heard a lot about tariffs, global trade, right, which is a more macro global flows of commodities that are of national security importance globally. And so I think that's what makes supply chain quite interesting to me, right? It's not only personal, but it's of great economic importance and of national security. And so that sort of breadth of ways we can relate to supply chain, I think, is quite interesting. And being in Chicago and a logistics hub, I think sort of puts us at the smack center of both of these views of the supply chain. So what I'll be trying to do in the next 30 minutes or so is talk about supply chain excellence and sustainability as sort of the value proposition of analytics AI, because when there's a lot of buzz around AI, you shouldn't forget why AI is needed in the first place. And then I'll make it a very Chicago perspective. So I've been here nearing 12 years, right? And so Chicago has certainly influenced how I think about things. Now, if you were physically with me in Chicago, let's say that all of you could be teleported here, I would have taken you on a tour, right? So Chicago has a lot of spots, attractions to hit to show you about supply chains. But we'll do the next best thing now. I'll do a virtual tour, right? And that's how the talk's set up. So we'll go on to see 3 attractions in Chicago. And through those visits, there'll be a framework that emerges on how we think about supply chain excellence, right? And then we'll look at a labor strike in one of those locations and understand what supply chain excellence might mean in a concrete setting. And then we'll decode how analytics and AI could have delivered business value in that specific setting. Okay. And so let's get started. So I promised Lindsay I'll show her the view outside my office. So this is what I see outside my office, right? And so you can see the high rises up front. That's sort of the business district, highways, a lot of transportation going on, right? You'll see like a rail track. You might even see the occasional semi. And so we're a logistics hub. And if you look really closely, what you see in red in the garden there is actually a UIC sign in the garden up front. Okay, so a lot happening right outside my office. But what's more important is the map on your right. And so that shows the locations we're going to visit. You can see that the 3 of the locations are really in Chicago, but one's about, I would say, about 20 to 30 minutes from Chicago. So let's start from the furthest location and then come close to UIC for our debrief. So first stop is what's called the Center Point Intermodal Facility. It's North America's largest inland port. This is absolutely massive. Okay, so 6,400 acres. It handles about 3 million containers annually. And just to give you some context, it connects to about quarter of the US population within 500 miles. So depending on how fast you drive, whether you're in a sports car or not, you're doing sub 8 hours to reach quarter of the population. And seven of the largest railroads, six of them cross through Chicago. So very likely, if you're moving something in North America, Chicago is a likely touch point at some part of this, right? And so this physical infrastructure that allows us to move goods is what I'll call the physical layer throughout the talk. And that's a key layer. And if you think about supply chains, it's the physical layer that gets most of the love, right? When you think about supply chain, you think about something physical. Okay, and I would say this is sort of the heartbeat of our city. And so it's very, very much Chicago. Now, the second stop is the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. Again, I'm showing you the river. It's a beautiful place. So you're probably wondering at this point, is this a supply chain masterclass, or am I just taking you to places I like in Chicago? It's true, I love this place, but it's also very important for supply chain. So I want to pause for a second, take 5 seconds, and then think about why a commodity trading hub might be the second place you visit in a supply chain tour. Okay, and hold that thought, and if you can enter it into the Q&A, we can answer those later. But I want to give you a few seconds to think about why that might be the case. Right, so let me share my perspective. So think about the physical layer that we just saw. What does the physical layer do? It moves goods from point A to point B, right? And if you think about that movement, two things matter in the movement of goods. One is the value of the goods, and the value of the goods that you're moving are determined by trades that happen in the financial market. And the second is the transportation cost that you pay for moving things from point A to point B. That's also affected by trades in the financial market, right? So profit-making companies don't only move items, they also care about whether things are profitable. And so that's determined by external financial markets. And so this determines the second layer in a supply chain is the financial layer. So when we talk about a financial ecosystem, often you'll think about internal finances, right? Like receivables, receipts, and so on. They're really important. But equally important are the external market forces that drive prices and the profitability of a firm. So now having seen this, let's move to our last location. This is the MXD Innovation Center. This is not far from UIC. Okay, it's not a walk, but a short car ride. It's again a massive center. It's 22,000 square foot innovation center where they test a lot of different things. So a lot going on here, from smart manufacturing equipment to digital supply chain solutions, and we sometimes take our students here as part of our classes. And so two things that are going on at MXD that are quite interesting. One is called digital twin, where if there are disruptions in our supply chain, now we have algorithms and AI to sort of simulate those disruptions ahead of time and see what those effects are. This is something that we also do in my research group. And the other thing that's really exciting is the humanoid robots that are coming out. So a precursor to that are just the sensors that are on all the equipments that feed back real-time data. Right now, if I have a machine that's in production, I get real-time data on the status of that machine, and it's easy to record. What that means is that I can add machine learning algorithms on top of that to predict failures ahead of time and increase efficiency and uptime of my production. And so this third layer is sort of at the heart of analytics and AI. This is where companies' analytics and AI capabilities sit. And going back to what I mentioned about value, right? Whenever you have a digital layer, you need to ask about how do I extract value from the digital layer? And in a very reductive way, one way for us to think about it is that the digital layer allows us to act in the physical layer, right? Execute movements and interact with the financial layer so those movements are profitable. Okay, and so that's sort of how we'll think about supply chains in this talk. So having seen these three facilities, let's go back to UIC. This is Douglas Hall. This is where we'll have our debrief. So we'll quickly step back, look at what we've seen in the tour, and then we'll use that as a jumping point to consider potential disruption at one of the places we just visited. Okay. All right. So the main takeaway are these three layers: the physical layer, where there's movement of goods, which is what we typically associate with the supply chain. And you can see there's a canonical supply chain that is seen on top. So when I talk about physical movement, it could be from a supplier to a factory, factory to a warehouse, all the way to a consumer. And for those moves to be profitable, we have the financial layer that determines cash flows, profitability, and cost. And then you have a digital layer, which is where your data prediction optimization and automation, which is one of the things that you pointed out, all of that sits there. Okay. And I always like to give like a human analogy because that's easiest for us to understand, right? So think about as humans, our hands, legs, and so on are sort of what determines the physical layer for us. That's what actually allows us to do things. The financial layer is like your wallet, your bank account, the resources that enable that. And then the digital layer, like your senses, right? So your eyes, sense of smell, and so on. Now, obviously, it's easy for us to understand that if our senses are not coordinated with our physical movement, things are going to break down. And that's not very different from a supply chain. So the physical layer, financial layer, and digital layer need to be coordinated. Okay, and as it and the interesting thing about coordination is when everything works well, nobody even notices it, right? Supply chains are like they're humming away, things are all fine. But when things break down, is when you really see the effects of and the importance of supply chain. So there's this 70s song um, called the Yellow Taxi, right? Where there's this saying called "You don't know, you ain't know what you got till it's gone," right? So let's actually ask what happens when coordination breaks down, and what are the effects of poor coordination. Okay, and to do that, let's go back to the center point facility that we saw, this huge logistics location, and assume there's a labor strike. Okay, so there's railway worker strike, and day zero is when that happens. And now a company is reacting to that labor strike. So what's going to happen is there's going to be freight congestion because the rail is not moving, warehouse inventories are going to go up. And if people shift to trucking, there are going to be trucking delays. And I just told you the extent to which Chicago is connected to the rest of North America. So there are going to be ripple effects, right? It's not a localized Chicago thing. It's going to affect freight in the rest of North America. The physical layer is going to then spill over to the financial layer. Companies are going to start shifting again from rail to truck. So truck transportation and fuel costs are going to go up. That's going to surge. And so a movement before from, say, Chicago to New York, which was profitable, now with increased freight costs, might not be profitable anymore, right? And if I have customer service levels that I have to meet, I still have to execute on that transaction at a financial loss. So this is where a digital layer comes in, right? And so if you want to react to this issue, you want a digital layer that would react in the most efficient and optimized manner. Okay, and so that's your reactive approach. But it's also equally important to ask, did the digital layer miss a material risk that could have been predicted ahead of time where you could have given a more organized response, right? So think about the labor strike. It's unlikely that suddenly on day zero, the workers decided to strike. There must have been signs of this weeks in advance, days in advance, and so on. And so a key question here is to ask, is the digital layer of this firm strong enough to have caught it? Okay, and so this is one way for which to think of organizations. Some organizations have a digital layer that's more reactive, and there are other organizations where the digital layers are more proactive. Okay, and that's going to be a very important distinction. So let's look at the case where we have a proactive company with a strong digital layer. Okay, so like I said, it's likely the case there have been news announcements, potentially negotiations that have been going on for weeks. So 1 week before the actual railway strike, let's say day -7 on your slide that you see, you have an AI driven agent that detects using social media feeds, news, and so on, that there's an elevated risk of a strike. Okay, and detecting this is very useful. And as soon as that happens, we can go to what we just saw at MXD, this digital twin simulation, and try to simulate what could be the impact of this on the company's logistics even before it happens. Okay, so everything that you see in blue in this slide relates to the digital layer. Everything in green is the financial layer, and everything in red is the physical layer. I'll use that coding throughout. Right, so as soon as you detect this and you simulate the impacts of a potential railway strike on the logistics, you can proactively plan now. You can try to find alternative shipments, alternate warehouse capacity, and you can pre-allocate it before the risk actually shows up in day zero, right? So you can be prepared. And so what this allows you to do in a few days, that's day -5, is through proactive planning, you can lock in those freight and fuel costs. You can talk to your transport vendors and partners and say, look, this is potentially going to come up. I need to lock in transport capacity for trucking. I need more capacity. And those negotiations, when they happen a week ahead, you'll get much better rates than if you're doing it in a reactive manner in day zero. Okay, and then in day zero, it doesn't mean nothing happens. You still have to react. Plans don't always go as expected, right? But now you're doing a very structured, optimized response to a situation than being in crisis mode. And that's really what happens. Now let's take a step back. Now I know in the poll, the top response was AI automation literacy, and I think the second one, and one of them was also strategic decision making and uncertainty. I think that was the third choice, right? So let's step back and connect those poll choices to what I'm just saying. If you look at what we talk about as AI driven detection, that's what's called diagnostic analytics or AI or risk analytics, right? You're trying to discover risks using data. And that's a very mature use case for AI compared to, say, agentic workflows and so on. That's a fairly mature use case. So just as something for you to do offline after this talk, there are news feeds now. Previously, we used to look at Google News and so on, right? The recommendation engines that give you the news that you'd like to use. The newer news feeds like Feedly and so on are essentially AI driven. So they not only make recommendations based on your reading, they actually try to learn patterns about what you do based on your social media, based on the other things that you do, if you give access to it, of course. And then it'll actually try to discover what is the news that you actually want to listen to. Okay. So the first thing that we're talking about AI driven risk detection is really talking about uncovering insights from news, social media about this labor strike that you may not be able to do as a human, right? So these cognitively heavy tasks for us that are not necessarily impossible is what AI is really good at right now. Okay. The other thing, going to the third poll option on strategic decision making under uncertainty, if you look at the reallocation decision of warehouse capacity in supply chain, that's called a flexibility decision. And the reason that's important is if I reallocate warehouse capacity and let's say there's no labor strike, right? Then the reallocated capacity doesn't have much value because if everything is always going according to normal, then that wouldn't have value. So strategic decision making uncertainty is a key pillar where we can use AI because that depends on lack of information about the future, right? We need rich data sets which can mine to understand what those future risks are. So that's a great opportunity to use AI. Okay, so having said that now, let's try to understand how the reactive and proactive differences in these two companies, what is sort of at the heart of that, right? What's actually driving this? And that brings us to the strategic view in supply chain. So supply chain excellence is what we saw in the second case where you had this reactive company. You really view physical, financial, and digital layers as strategic assets. Okay. And the reactive company, the way they reacted is what in practice is called cost center thinking. So you have an issue, you need to manage cost to address that issue. And so you just, react to what's going on. And you might say, okay, wait, what does this have to do with sustainability? I thought sustainability was about the environment. And so I'd say this is long-term thinking is really what sustainability is about. And sustainability is probably the most misunderstood word because it appears in a lot of different contexts, right? So if you think about environmental sciences, it means something else. If you think about a farmer who's trying to manage their crops, temperature and climate is the key risk there. Okay. If instead I'm the company we're talking about in this example, the key risk for them was actually the capacity at center point, right? So sustainability is about long-term thinking. And one of the core tenets of sustainability is to first understand what are the risks that are material to you. And that's true for a profit-making business too, right? In this case, the capacity at center point, because a lot of freight is going through that. And if this company is using that as a hub, any disruption in capacity there is a material risk. And if they detect that and they can understand that, then I can plan strategically, add flexibility to manage things. And so this is not easy. It's easier said than done. And one of the reasons it's not easy is these big risks about labor strikes and other things, they don't happen daily, right? And so really a company has to take a long-term view to correctly value what that investment is. Okay, so that's strategic decision making and uncertainty, and it's a really difficult data problem. Okay, so for those of you interested in machine learning and AI, right, this is probably one of the hardest AI and ML problems that we face is how do you get a good sense of what the risks are in the future under limited data and diverse sources of data, and that's something that my group works on a lot. Okay, so let's now be very specific about AI. So what is the role of AI in our supply chain example, right? And I also want to clarify what's possible today and what's emerging and what's at the frontier, right? So it's important, especially as a research university, right, to separate the hype that you see from what's actually possible. So today, we're really talking about AI augmented workflows. So these are workflows that are designed by humans, right? They're run by humans, but AI augments them to make it more efficient. So like I said, in our Centerpoint example, if I need to look at news feeds, social media, and other feeds and extract meaningful signals from them, that's cognitively heavy work that I can offload to an AI agent, right? But whether those insights make sense to distill exactly the decision, how to act from those decisions automatically, we're not there yet from AI agents, right? That would be a highly risky thing to do at this point. Okay, so AI automation, literacy, like many of you pointed out, is something we can do, right? But that's different from an agentic workflow, which is the second thing. Agentic workflows where you give an AI an objective and constraints, and it determines the decisions for you, right? So humans just supervise, but it actually takes decisions, right? So in a Centerpoint example, just think about the AI agent detects the risk and then it actually makes decisions on how to reallocate capacity. Right now, we wouldn't trust the agent to do it on its own, right? We might just ask it to give you recommendations. And in the future, we're really talking about agentic supply chain. So you have multiple agents. You have like an agent that looks at transportation, an agent that looks at inventory, an agent that looks at negotiation. And when an event happens like this, they all talk to each other and they make decisions. Now, this I'm talking about is definitely years away at this point, okay? A few years away. We're right now at AI augmented workflows. And that's what my group largely uses. So let me get even more specific about how we, right, as either as a PI or my um, research associates that work in my group, how we find benefit from it. There are really two ways. Okay, so one is AI boosts analytics in either decision making or performance measurement. And you can transfer work to the agents so you free time to focus on modeling problems. I would say that would be the single biggest benefit that we've seen is I spend a lot more thinking about the more important modeling critical issues rather than some of the more procedural operational things. Okay, that's a lot of that is offloaded to the agents. And my group again works on AI, so a lot of these deep learning models have to handle, multimodal dynamic data. So this could be multimodal means, there's data that might be in a spreadsheet that's in numbers. You might have text data from PDFs, you might have videos, images, and so on. We can now easily process all of that. Previously, you needed to write a lot of custom code. Now, most of it is low code. And again, in our introductory AI classes in supply chain, we actually allow students to use video, text, and so on. And this was not possible even 2 years ago, by the way, okay? I could not have taught this 2 years ago. And that's what's really exciting is that the accessibility for to process data has just increased substantially. Okay, and so in our research projects, all of this then drills down into two buckets. Decision making, we spoke about flexibility and risk analytics in a Centerpoint example with the labor disruption, and then efficiency and optimization. This is sort of your reactive response, right? At day zero, you still have to be efficient. And then the second bucket is performance measurement. So you can't manage something that you can't measure, and that's very true in a supply chain. So you need to think about what are the internal KPIs, what are the diagnostic analytics you want to look at. So think about in the Centerpoint case, right? It could be that in a typical day, your freight transited through that facility in half a day. Right? That's the average transit time. But on that day, it's past 24 hours and your containers haven't moved. There has to be a signal from center point that comes into your company, and that has to get escalated up. If that doesn't happen, if that diagnostic part does not happen, you can have the best machine learning and AI, doesn't matter. Okay, so that detection is super important. So that's all internal. And then externally, you also need to benchmark against competitors and do market analytics. That's another thing that we tend to do. Okay, so where's the value, right? So this is all great. What I've told you in general could be applicable not only to supply chain, right? It could be applicable to finance, marketing, and so on. So what's so special about supply chain? So 2 points. One is the breadth of opportunity to apply AI is vast, right? Even in a simple example, we saw from data mining to predictive analytics to risk analytics to decision making, right? And so it sort of encompasses the whole gamut. The second is, I think it's important to acknowledge that in terms of value, we're still in early stages of AI, right? In terms of business value. And the initial signals for supply chain have been unique. So this is a report from Quantum Black from McKinsey. And what's shown here, everything in light blue is the increase in revenue from respondents of a survey. And what you see in the gray is decrease in cost from respondents. And these are by functional area, marketing and sales, risk, legal, and compliance, and so on. And what you'll notice in supply chain is supply chain in both decrease in cost and increase in revenue is within the top 3 sectors, which is unique. Okay. So the potential impact that people see of applying generative AI, the early signals are very, very promising. Okay. Now, having said that, you've probably heard in the popular press about the issues of scaling AI to deliver value, right? And Lindsay alluded to this in terms of energy. So let me comment on that. So scaling AI, there are a couple of barriers, and there are 2 barriers that we specifically focus on in our programs and in my research group. One is what I would term the digital barrier, okay? And so what we've found, and companies have also found, is that if you take AI and apply it to an existing process, let's say it's invoicing process or whatever it is, without thinking about it as an AI native process, you typically don't get much value, right? And what this bar graph shows you on top, in the top half of the slide, is that most of the high performers, the people who get most out of AI, 55% of them have fundamentally redesigned the workflow to make it native to AI. So you think about what are the capabilities of AI, you redesign your process, and then you use AI, as opposed to following the same process and patching it with AI. Okay? And so that's a big barrier right now because everyone's trying to find value from AI. So they're just trying to plug it into different parts of your process. Okay, so that's one issue that we need to contend with. The second issue is the physical barrier. Okay, and that has to do with electricity demand. I mean, this graph just shows you the growth that we're expecting in terms of electricity demand due to data centers. But this is obviously public information. You can read this from Carbon Brief. I am part of the Illinois Data Center Task Force. So I meet with the mayors and the big tech companies every 2 weeks. We jump on a call to discuss, how should Illinois move forward with data centers and energy consumption. And I can tell you that just 2 weeks ago, I live in close to a city called Naperville in Illinois. Naperville, even though the mayor recommended that a data center get built, the citizens voted it down. Okay, so there's a big debate on how we need to proceed to electrify everything, and the general view from society and from a sustainability standpoint, and whether we can support it. And so that's something that businesses care about deeply as well, right? So for those of you who care about sustainability, finance, and so on, this is a great area to work in. Okay, so let me close in the last couple of minutes by discussing some of the frontier things that we think about in my group. So what I'm showing you here in this slide is the actual process we follow when we consult with companies on AI projects. Okay, so let me just run through it very quickly. So on your left, you have data. So that's typically financial and operations data. It could be sensor data, like I told you with MXD, where you have sensors on equipment that feed things back in real time. And then you have normative scenarios. This is where you have, this is what I call the no data problem, right? If someone tells you they know what's going to happen in 20 years, they're probably lying. And so what you do here is you try to generate plausible scenarios of the future that could be using LLMs. There are other models to do it. So we collect all of that data. And then the second layer we look at is what's called the data fusion and risk modeling layer, where we compress all of that data into models where we can quantify the risk and uncertainty. And then we plug all of this into what we call a decision valuation optimization agent. So this is not optimizing to find the best decision. The hardest part here is to figure out if I'm making a decision, what is the value of that decision, right? And often what happens is we don't know how to value a decision, like changing capacity, and we optimize under the wrong value, in which case the decisions are going to be wrong. And then once you do all of this, you get supply chain decisions and performance. Now, the way I describe the process, you might think I start with data and end with decisions, right? Seems like a logical way that we typically actually see this in textbooks. But what you should be doing in practice is exactly the reverse. You should be thinking about what supply chain decision and metric am I interested in, and let that drive your data pipeline all the way to decisions, right? That would be the most informed and efficient way of doing things, and that's in fact the way we teach our students how to process supply chain decisions. So what is the future of this? One of the things that we think about in my group is what should we spend time on? There's so much going on, right? And so we focus a lot on decisions, as you can see from the previous slide here, right? I really care about what is the value you're getting out of things. I think keeping your eye on value and then thinking about the AI stack is the right way to go. And so decision intelligence gives you a nice framework of thinking about this. So in this figure, this is from Gartner, you'll see on your left different levels of decision intelligence. On top, you have decision support. This is typically how we've used data for decision making, right? There's some data, there's some insight report that comes out. I look at that and make a decision. The second level of that is decision augmentation, where now the AI agent actually gives you a list of recommendations based on your preferences, and you get to make the final call. And then there's AI automation, which is the machine makes the decision, right? So this typically works in low risk places. So that's sort of the um, trend that's been happening. Most of the prior work has been on decision support and decision automation. A lot of the work now is on decision augmentation. There's a lot of value there, right? And then if you look at the horizontal axis, this tells you something about the environments that we work in. Typically, previously, we looked at well-known structured decisions in environments where there's not a lot of uncertainty. Now we're moving to very adaptive decisions. So if you think about labor strike example, we were trying to adaptively understand the risks, make adaptive decisions, and then react at day zero. So that's where we're really going to. And as a researcher, what's really exciting for me is we've been working on this for the last 10 years, okay? But now practice applies this regularly, right? And if you look at Gartner's hype cycle, they say that in 2 to 5 years, this will be mainstream. 2 years is, not much time. And this is a 2024 hype cycle, right? So we're already seeing a lot of this happen, which I think is great for all of you. So let me close with a couple of takeaways, because I'm right about time right now. So there are three things I'd like you to keep in mind and think about. So one is that there are three layers of a supply chain. Even though the physical layer is what gets most of our attention, the financial and digital layers have to work together to create an adaptive supply chain, right? Supply chain resilience, I think since COVID and with all the global trade issues has become, probably something that every nation has to think about and every company that operates globally has to think about seriously. The second thing is that when you think about sustainability, you really are taking a long-term strategic view. So strategic decision making under uncertainty is going to be at the core of that if you want to create value. And AI and decision intelligence is one way in which we can transform the supply chain. And that's where you have to be careful about whether you want to go with AI augmentation or AI automation. And that difference does matter based on the risk and importance of the decision that you're trying to make. So, the supply chains are going to be disrupted significantly in the next few years. And I think many of you will be entering, uh, your roles wherever that is in a really exciting time, I think. And so you will have an actual chance to transform these supply chains. And while my group is also thinking about how we can do it, hopefully you've got some nuggets here to inform your path to make an impact in supply chain. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nadarajah. That was very, very interesting. And I can't think of another field that is so rapidly changing and so relevant to what's going on today. And I really like how you put out some practical ways that people can think about sustainability and also prepare for anything that could happen. So very thoughtful and relevant as well. I see a few questions for you in the Q&A. We are going to come to those later, but I'd like to invite everyone to continue their questions in the Q&A, and we'll address them at the end or throughout. And I'm going to invite Dr. Jewett to present a little bit more about UIC Business and the programs. He is the Assistant Dean for Business Recruitment, and I'll turn it over to Jeff.
Great. Thank you, Lindsay, and thank you, Professor Selva. It's great to speak with everyone today. Again, I'm Jeff Jewett. I serve as Assistant Dean for Recruitment at University of Illinois Chicago College of Business. And today I will give you a brief overview of all of our different programs and also talk a little bit about admissions requirements. As Professor Selva mentioned, we are right in the heart of right in the heart of Chicago for our campus location. You can literally land from just about anywhere at O'Hare Airport, and for roughly €2 or about 230 rupees, take the train for 45 minutes from O'Hare and be dropped off right where those students are standing right there. That's where I get off at the train every day, and it's a short walk to your campus classes. So I think that's one great advantage of UIC is its location. We are minutes from all of the excitement that Chicago offers. I know if you're looking at graduate programs, you have a lot of different choices, but one of the things that sets UIC apart is our high return on investment. We are a state-supported institution, so that typically means our tuition and fees are lower than what you'll see at other schools. We also offer a great deal of flexibility as well. Most of our programs offer a large number of electives that you can really customize your educational experience. And again, the Chicago location is second to none, that you are just 2 kilometers away from the financial center. That means that you have access to world-class employers, such companies as Chicago Mercantile Exchange that Professor Silva mentioned. United Airlines is headquartered nearby as well, too. And a large number of tech and banking companies as well, too. Chicago does not have one particular industry sector. Unlike other cities, we really have a good representation of different career opportunities for you. We are also what's called a Carnegie One designated research institution, and there's only a handful of those universities in the state of Illinois, and only about 150 within the United States. So that means our faculty are engaged in the highest level of research productivity. They publish in top journals as well too, and we are also AACSB accredited. In addition to all of the hard skills that you'll get with any of our graduate programs, we also want to focus on the soft skills. That is something that's going to really set you apart when it comes to job placement upon graduation. So we have iLead that pulls in practical solutions from improv techniques to make sure that you have great interpersonal communication skills, strong negotiation tactics as well, and it really helps you get out of your comfort zone and be prepared to work in a highly competitive environment as well. There's a few rankings that we're really proud of. Our MBA program is ranked in the top 100 by U.S. News and World Report, and some of our MS programs are also ranked by QS World University Rankings as well too. We are also a very diverse campus. We're one of the most diverse campuses in the U.S. When you walk through campus, you will see people from all different backgrounds, which I think makes it really unique. We also have a strong international population as well too, and we're consistently ranked as a best value university. I want to give a brief overview of our different programs that we offer. We offer an MBA program that you can do on a full-time basis as an international student, along with programs in accounting, business analytics, where you may have Professor Selva as one of your instructors, an MS in finance, an online MS in HR management, our Master of Science in Information Management, MS in Marketing, which can be done fully in person or online, and then an MS in Supply Chain and Operations Management. A number of these programs are STEM designated. That means that as an international applicant, that upon graduation, you can receive up to 3 years of optional practical training if you have job placement in the U.S. So just to give you a brief overview of our MS programs, there is no work experience required for these. And each of the programs are 32 credit hours in length. Some of these may take a little bit longer depending on your particular academic background. We accept all majors. So for instance, if you have a degree in law or communications, but don't have a strong technical background, you can still apply to our business analytics or management information systems programs. It just means that you'll have some additional prerequisite courses that you'll take in the beginning of your studies to make sure that you're successful. Again, most of these programs can be completed on 2 to 3 semesters, so anywhere from 9 months to a year and a half on a full-time basis for an international student. And again, we have 5 designated STEM designated programs as well too. So something to keep in mind when you're considering graduate options. For an MBA program, you can start in the fall or spring semesters and pursue this on a full-time basis. Again, we do prefer 2 years of work experience for this particular program, but if you have a strong GPA or strong internship experience, you can be considered for the program without that 2 years of post-bachelor's work experience. The MBA program is 42 credit hours in length. It has a strong core component, so you'll have courses such as finance, marketing, and accounting, and then you can pick from a number of different electives as well to make up your concentrations. We have concentrations in such fields as business analytics, finance, and marketing. And again, this is a brief overview of what our core curriculum is, and then the different concentrations that you're able to choose from for the MBA. We also have a number of joint degrees that if you're thinking about pursuing business acumen from two different fields, you can choose that. We see a lot of individuals especially do that with our MBA program. So if you want kind of the general business knowledge that you get out of an MBA, but more focused knowledge that you may get out of something like our business analytics program, you can do that. And what's great is there's a sharing of credits amongst the two programs with a joint degree that allows you to save time and money in completing both. Okay. If you're thinking about any programs from UIC Business, I definitely encourage you to check out Business Connect. This is a really helpful resource in planning out your degrees, seeing what prerequisites that you may have, and also degree requirements as well too. So businessconnect.uic.edu is the URL for that. And again, it's a really helpful resource in showing what each degree program requires. We also have a number of ways for you to get involved outside of the classroom. And I will say one of the most important things, especially studying in the U.S., is developing a strong professional network that, you will have, it's assumed that you'll have strong technical knowledge, but making those industry connections is really important. So we have over 20 different student organizations that you can get involved with, and many of them are major specific. So for instance, if you're interested in marketing or business analytics, we have student organizations that would be a good fit for that. They bring in industry professionals, alums, and have different networking opportunities, and it will really help boost your chances of job placement upon graduation. We also have a dedicated business career center, and they will help with resume development, mock interviews, and connect you with over 200 different employers that come and interview at UIC. This is, again, a resource that we recommend utilizing from day one, and making sure that you make those strong corporate connections early on. And this is just a sampling of some of the companies that we that hire UIC graduates. We're really proud of where our students go on to work upon graduation, and it really speaks of the quality of education that you receive, and also where you end up in terms of job placement opportunities. In terms of the application process, it is done 100% online. There is a $80 application fee. And then if you graduate from an institution outside of the US, there is also an additional $100 international credential evaluation fee. Something to keep in mind, UIC does not accept outside credential evaluations such as WES. So just plan on that when submitting your application. Most of our programs also require two short application essays along with your resume and transcripts. And then for international applicants, we accept either the TOEFL or IELTS. And then the GMAT or GRE is optional for all programs. This is one way that you can help strengthen your application and also improve chances of scholarship opportunities. But for all of our programs, they are not required. Then for the MBA program, we do require a brief interview that would be done over Zoom. And then most of our programs also require two letters of recommendation. The good news is that you still have ample time to apply for the fall semester. Our application deadline for international applicants is April 1. So you still have 2 months to complete the application process. If you have any additional questions, definitely feel free to reach out to us. Our email address is gradbusiness@uic.edu. And I also have ways that you can scan the QR code for more additional information or to scan our download our view book as well too. All right.
Thank you so much, Jeff.
Thank
Really
you.
great information and a wide variety of programs to choose from. I see some questions coming in the Q&A, and I'm going to invite Dr. Nadarajah back on as well to help answer some of those live. And please keep them coming on the admissions questions. We will keep Jeff on screen as well to get to those as well. So with that, there's a really great question here from Pushpender who says, what decision would you say should never be automated, no matter how good the data gets? I really like that question. I'm going to push that over to Dr. Selva if you have an answer for that.
Yeah, I was looking, that's a really good one. I would say, decisions that affect people in your organization in significant ways and communities, like the data center example I gave you, I would never automate those decisions, right? Because in those cases, as an organization, even within the organization, it's almost what you don't know and the feedback you need to collect from people and having those conversations, the human element becomes even more important in those decisions than whether you've got the decision right itself, if that makes sense, right? How people perceive decisions, the psychological human aspects of those decisions are far greater than and the decision itself. In those situations, it doesn't matter how much data you have, you won't have buy-in from your organization without that. And I think that's a great question, Pushpender, because I think a lot of the things that we focus on in the business school around change management and things like this are way more relevant now with AI than before. And sometimes we forget that with all the technological advances. It's a great question.
And great answer. I see also, I know you were starting to answer this question, but for everybody else, how would you suggest somebody approaches, especially in today's age, a career in supply chain management? So what kind of education or even internships or resources that they should be looking at if they want to pursue a career in supply chain?
So I would say context, understanding what supply chains, how supply chains work, the earlier you can get into, it could be an internship. I usually tell students that it could just be even a volunteer position. It doesn't have to be a paid internship. You could even think about shadowing someone in a supply chain company just to understand what it means, right? And that's the sort of exposure you should try to get to convince yourself that supply chain is the right place for you. I think there's something in it for everybody, but studying something and experiencing it is very different. And so getting that experiential part is what I would say you should get started to figure out what's your passion in pursuing this field.
Yes, I like that. Make sure you're passionate about it first. And it sounds like Jeff was sharing even all of the different areas of specialization within the MBA or within the school. And that's a really great way to explore as well while you're studying. I see a question from Arya, and maybe we'll approach it a little bit more generally. There's a question about taking a gap year. And are there any programs, Jeff, that require you to start right out of undergrad, or do all of them allow work experience? If you could tell us a little bit more about that work experience component or direct entry.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, it, with any of our programs, you can come in at any point. So, I would say we have for MS programs, a lot of individuals come straight from undergrad, but that's not a requirement. We do see a lot of individuals that come in with, 2 to 3 years of experience. With our MBA, we do prefer that someone comes in with at least 2 years of work experience, but that's not a requirement. So, taking a gap year to work, is totally fine for any of our programs.
Okay, great. There's a couple of questions around recommendations
Mhm.
and how to seek out the best recommendation. More
Yeah.
specifically on the technical side, Jeff, is it a recommendation letter or a questionnaire? And maybe provide a few tips on finding that best person to recommend.
Yeah, so for any of our programs, recommendations can be either professional or academic. So if you have a professor that you stay in contact with or a supervisor, those are two great examples of recommenders. And the way our recommendation works is that in your application portal, you'll put in your recommender's contact information, and a brief questionnaire gets sent to them with some open-ended questions and some also ranking questions as well too. The recommenders have the option of submitting a formal letter, but they don't have to. We realize that recommendations can take a long time. I'm sure Professor Selva gets quite a few over the years, and so we've tried to streamline the process as much as possible. That I would say probably takes about 10 to 15 minutes for our recommendation to be completed by the recommender, and then they submit that back to us. So it's we try to streamline the process as much as possible, but we're pretty flexible in terms of who the actual recommenders are. Again, professional or academic, work perfectly fine, or can be a combination of both.
Fantastic. Thank you. And I think we're going to have one time for one more question. And I'm going to reframe it a little bit more generally. And this is from Hater Dr. Nadarajah. And this is about the fact that people are feeling that work is being taken over by AI, and specifically in supply chain and analytics. What do you think are the specific subsets of these fields that people should focus on to make sure that their jobs are not being at risk from AI? And what do you think are the sort of future-proof careers within this space?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, Haider, so one way of thinking about this, there is job compression in roles that are easily automated. So, right, so these are very process-oriented jobs. So, even in my earlier response to a question, I said understanding how to manage processes and resources is important. But if that's just if that can be written down and every single time you're following the same things, those are the processes that get automated, right? Wherever you need human input on decisions that are risky, those jobs are not going away anytime soon. Then there are also jobs that interface with customers, clients, right? Vendors. Those, some of them will get negotiated. Some of them will get automated in the pipeline, but the entire pipeline is not going to go away because there's a human element to it as well. So what we're noticing in the job market, and we track this, of course, closely, is the overall job market in supply chain is growing. But there is compression in these jobs, as you rightly point out, that are heavily process oriented in a very fixed way, right? Now, the way I tell our students, especially those who come to grad school, these are typically not the students are master students. These are not jobs our master students take anyway, right? Our students are typically going into companies where they handle planning in some of the situations I told you, under disruptions and so on. They handle inventory management. All of these are rapidly, dynamically changing environments where AI is not yet gear to take over. So it's a twofold answer. One is in dynamic environments where the risk of these decisions are high. I don't see AI taking over anytime soon. And the other part is the human element. Any role that involves client-facing activities, we're still not moving to AI. So those are two areas where our students typically uh, take careers in. And in my last 12 years, the students I've taught, so maybe biased to my students, right? But that's the general trend that we're seeing.
Great, thank you. And I mean, I think that's a great summary as well, thinking about graduate business education, because leadership is not something that AI is going to take over, and the problem solving that comes from doing a master's or MBA degree in business. So this is a great time to think about that, to develop those skills that you can sort of adapt to a very rapid changing landscape. And with that, you can see on your screen, there are a couple of QR codes and websites to follow up with UIC Business and keep in touch as you explore their programs and determine your candidacy to study in Chicago. So thank you so much to our fantastic speakers today, and to all of you for the great engagement, thoughtful questions, and for joining us on the virtual masterclass today. So please follow up with the school or with Seed as you have questions, and hopefully you will be able to see that beautiful view out that window from Dr. Nadarajah, and be physically in Chicago as well in the future and explore all of those fantastic supply chains within the city. So thank you to all of you for joining today, and have a great evening, day, or morning, depending on where you're joining us from. Thank you.